The year is 1914. The United States is booming. The Industrial Revolution is fueled by one thing, coal. And millions of tons of that coal need to be moved across the country every single day. For the American railroads, this created a brutal arms race. The tracks were clogged. The mountains of Pennsylvania and New York stood like giant walls blocking the path to the factories. To push heavy coal trains over these steep grades, railroad companies had to use helper engines, 2, 3, or even 4 locomotives strapped to a single train, all burning coal, all requiring their own crews. It was expensive. It was inefficient. The Erie Railroad decided they had had enough. They went to the legendary Baldwin Locomotive Works with a simple, terrifying demand: build us a locomotive so big, so heavy, and so powerful, that it can do the work of 3 massive trains all by itself. Baldwin's engineers went to their drawing boards. They threw out the traditional rules of steam engine design. What they built wasn't just a train. It was a rolling mechanical nightmare. They named it the Triplex. When it rolled out of the factory, the world had never seen anything like it. It was almost 90 feet long. Fully loaded, it weighed 853,000 pounds, well over 425 tons of solid steel, iron, coal, and boiling water. But the weight wasn't the craziest part. It was the wheels. A normal heavy locomotive of the era might have 4 or 6 massive driving wheels. The Triplex had 24. They were divided into 3 completely separate sets of 8 wheels. There was a set under the front. There was a set under the massive boiler. And then, the engineers did something truly bizarre. They put the 3rd set of driving wheels underneath the tender, the car that carries the coal and water. In a standard train, the tender is just dead weight being dragged along. But the designers of the Triplex realized they could use the immense weight of the fuel and water itself to push the wheels down onto the tracks, giving the machine unbelievable traction. To power 24 wheels, you need massive force. The Triplex was fitted with 6 enormous steam cylinders. The high-pressure steam from the massive boiler would shoot into the middle cylinders, driving the center wheels. Then, the exhaust steam, still incredibly hot and pressurized, was recycled and split. Half went to power the front wheels, and half went to power the rear wheels under the coal tender. It was an engineering masterpiece on paper. In 1914, the Erie Railroad proudly unveiled their new Titan, officially named Matt H. Shea, after a beloved engineer. The press went wild. They called it the Centipede. To prove its dominance, the railroad set up a massive test. They attached the Triplex to a train of 250 fully loaded steel coal cars. The train was over 3 miles long. It weighed more than 17,000 tons. The engineer pulled the throttle. The massive cylinders hissed. All 24 driving wheels gripped the steel rails. Slowly, agonizingly, the gargantuan train began to move. It successfully pulled the massive load, setting a world record for the heaviest train ever hauled by a single locomotive. The Erie Railroad thought they had conquered physics. They ordered 2 more of the massive machines. But out in the real world, away from the controlled tests, a fatal, embarrassing flaw began to reveal itself. The Triplex was a monster, yes. But it was a monster with severe asthma. A steam locomotive is essentially a giant kettle. You burn coal to boil water, which creates the steam pressure needed to push the pistons. The Triplex had an enormous firebox, so large it required 2 firemen constantly shoveling coal just to keep it fed. But the 6 massive cylinders were simply too greedy. When the Triplex was moving at 5 miles per hour, crawling up a steep mountain grade, it was a god of torque. It could push anything. But the moment the engineer tried to speed up, to 10 or 15 miles per hour, disaster struck. The cylinders consumed the steam much faster than the massive boiler could produce it. The pressure gauge in the cabin would plummet. The massive train would slowly lose power, wheezing and choking on its own lack of steam, until it was forced to stop completely right in the middle of the tracks. The crew would then have to sit there, waiting for the fire to boil enough water to build the pressure back up before they could move again. It was humiliating. It was the equivalent of a modern supercar that drains its entire gas tank in 2 minutes. Furthermore, the bizarre design of powering the tender wheels created another massive problem. As the locomotive burned through its coal and boiled away its water, the tender became lighter. Without that heavy weight pushing down, those rear-driving wheels lost their grip. They would start spinning violently and slipping on the steel rails, shaking the train and wasting even more precious steam. The maintenance was a nightmare. The mechanics hated the machine. Fixing the complicated piping that routed steam all the way to the back of the train was dangerous, exhausting work. The Erie Triplex was designed to be the ultimate weapon of the American railroad. Instead, it became a slow, expensive liability. It could only be used as a slow-speed pusher on a single, specific hill in Pennsylvania. By the late 1920s, railroad technology had evolved. New, more efficient designs, like the Texas and the Berkshire types, proved that you didn't need 24 wheels and an impossible boiler to pull heavy freight. You just needed better engineering. Less than 15 years after they were built, the massive triplexes were quietly retired. In 1933, these 400-ton titans of industry were cut apart with blowtorches and sold for scrap metal. Not a single Erie Triplex survives today. They remain a bizarre footnote in the history of American railroading. The triplex is the ultimate proof that in the world of heavy engineering, brute force and massive scale can only take you so far. If you build a giant, you better make sure it has the lungs to breathe. Thanks for watching Iron Legacy. If you enjoyed this dive into America's historic steam railroads, hit the subscribe button. And let me know in the comments, do you think the triplex was a brilliant idea ruined by bad technology, or just a foolish vanity project from the start? See you in the next one.